Many years ago, I had a company owner called me and was in a bit of a turmoil. He was very upset. His team was burnt out. They were getting ready to rebel. He said they'd been working for 8 weeks straight, which is, that's a long time. Um, and they've been totally engaged in the projects they were working on. In other words, he was calling me from an empty office. He'd got back, half a day early from the big show that they were on, and he was trying to figure out what to do next. And he had other clients that wanted him, and the team wanted a break. And he says, I've got to turn down business for the next 2 months. How do I do that? And, he didn't have a choice, because if he had continued to push the team the way he'd been doing it, they were going to walk off. They were going to quit. They were burned out. So how did you get that way? How did you get into a situation where you knew you were going to be busy and it was going to take the entire team? And this is not a small company. This is a pretty darn big company that often had shows where the entire company, 80% of all the employees were on that show site. So very unusual circumstances in this modern era on there. But it allowed me to start to drill down into what the real problem was. And the real problem was because this business didn't know how to forecast. They didn't know how to accurately predict how much business they were going to do. They lived in the all revenue was good. And when the revenue buckets were full and everybody was busy, they turned down revenue. On deeper understanding, we often find that their revenue is not created equal. So not only did they chase revenue, they filled their calendar up with unprofitable revenue at the expense of really good revenue, because they focused on being too busy. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in there, but what I really want to focus on is how do we get better at forecasting so that we have a better chance of predicting demand so that we could take appropriate steps to be able to accommodate demand rather than just turn down business. Strap on, we're going to get this one figured out.
Welcome to your weekly dose of uncommon sense, helpful insights, and tough love. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. The Intentional Success Podcast comes to you through the generous support of Mertz Crew.
Mertz Crew helps top AV companies book quality AV freelancers. Your choice, your rates. We handle contracts, insurance, and payments. You save time, cost, and reduce risk. Start today at mertzcrew.com.
Now on to the show.
Well, the first thing I do when my clients ask me how they can become better at forecasting is I ask them, tell me what your lines of business are. And that's usually, unless they've been my client for a while, that's usually met with dead air because, we are our business. We do events, blah, 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 blah. That's our business. It's like, well, that's a line of business. What else do you do? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, do you sell equipment? Oh, yeah, we sell them. We sell LED walls and we install them. We have a nice little business, 3 or 4 times a year, we put an LED wall in a church somewhere. I said, awesome. Do you know that's a separate line of business? Well, how? It's using equipment. I said, it makes money differently from your other line of business. So one line of business is sales. Another line of business is integration or installation. Another line of business is rental-based event production. They are not the same thing. Even though they're coming out of the same warehouse and the gear looks the same and the same people might be doing it, it's very different. So it's like when you walk into a bar or a restaurant and you sit down at the bar and you order a drink before dinner and you've got to pay your bar tab and then go to your table to sit down and order a drink from the bar at your table on a different tab. It's because they're 2 different lines of business. In every restaurant bar combination, there are 2 different lines of business. There are 2 different revenue streams they look at differently. They have 2 different margins. They have 2 different teams that work on them, right? Okay, there's a reason for this. They make money differently in a bar than you do serving people food at a table, right? Many of businesses are that way. So let's talk about the different types of businesses that you are running under your flag right now. For instance, if you have contracts with venues, you're doing any kind of managed services in venues, that's a different line of business than your rental business. If your rental business is, a customer can come pick up a projector and a screen and take it to their office, that's rental. If you have a B2B rental business in which you do sub-rentals for other companies with excess or available equipment, that's a different line of business. Okay, B2B is a different line of business than B2C consumer rentals line of business. Do you do creative for your clients? Do you do concepts and drawings and design themes for them? That's a line of business. It works a different timeline than your events. It is not a rental. It is using intellect. You're selling intellectual property. You're selling time. And it is a standalone. It is a standalone profit center. Now you can combine that with pre-production and event production and do a full service show, which would be lovely, but they're not all the same thing. So you can't look at all the revenue equally. The revenue for the event production has a different margin than the revenue for the content creation, which is a different revenue and gross profit factor for the creative side. They make money differently. They generate a unique gross profit. They have specific costs associated with it that the other areas don't have. So number one, to do forecasting, you have to understand what your lines of business are. You have different types of revenue. Now, once you have that sorted out, now we can go over and take a look at our customers, okay? You have different revenue types and different lines of business, and sometimes you can have in a line of business, you can have the same revenue in different lines of business. In other words, you can have rental that goes into content production, and you can have rental that goes on to event production. It's still a rental transaction, okay, if you treat it that way, but they can be within different lines of business. When we come over to your customers, which lines of business are they buying from you? So we're going to break down customer types. And by customer types, it's not, oh, this is an association, this is a farmer. We're not talking about verticals, okay? We're not even talking about channels. Oh, we're working for the marketing manager. We're working for, the executive office. No, we're talking about what is their relationship with you. A client is somebody who gives you all of their business. They have their relationship with you is that for a given set of things that you do, that is your lines of business, they expect you to do all of those things for them. That is your relationship. They're a client. You always have a right of first refusal or the implied right of first refusal because you're their partner. They're coming to you. You do their events. Here are the events that you do. Very clear. Customers think about whether they're going to come to you or go to somebody else every single time. Okay. They put things out to bid. Now, you can argue that if you work with an association and you have a 3-year contract, they're a client, except that they are not because they are a customer with a 3-year contract. Okay. And if you make them unhappy, they're going to move on anyway. So they are buying from you really 1 year at a time. They want the convenience of not having to think about it for 3 years, which doesn't make them any more loyal. It just means they're a little bit lazy or understaffed to manage another supplier like you or to change suppliers on an annual basis. So customers come to you and they can be recurring customers. Like we do this show every year, but it's not guaranteed. We do this show every year and it's under a 3-year agreement. We're on year 3. And you have customers who are what I call pickup customers. They found you this time. Their event is in your town this time. They discovered you on the interwebs. Okay. They tried another company. Now they're going to try you. These are all pickup business. So the business that you don't see coming, but does tend to find you, some portion of your business is this pickup business. And then hidden in these customers are windfall customers. This is the big one-time, one-off jobs. It could be a recurring job that you got lucky and won. That doesn't mean it is not a windfall. So a windfall job is anything that's more than, if a job or a customer is more than 25% of your business, it's going to be a windfall. If it doesn't use all of your services, it only uses a very small amount of it. If you're not the primary contractor on the show, it is probably a windfall. If you're punching above your weight, it's going to be a windfall, right? If this happened all the time, it would fundamentally change your business model. It's a windfall, right? So we do windfalls. There's nothing wrong with doing a windfall, but just we need to recognize what they are. Because otherwise, and we're going to talk about revenue forecasting, you're going to say, oh, well, we did $8 million last year, but this year we're only doing $6 million because we lost that $2 million job. Well, let's unpack that. That's not what happened. You had a $2 million job. It only happened one time. You were never going to do it again. So you didn't become an $8 million company. You were a $6 million company who had $8 million of revenue. That revenue went away and you're a $6 million company again. Because why? Because you quit selling because you were so busy working on the windfall, right? So this is why forecasting is so important. And we have one more type of client, which is that B2B client, which is that courtesy work we do. Sometimes it's good revenue, it's nice profit to fill in. If you've got if you have idle equipment or idle resources and one of your commercial partners wants to use it and hire you to do it, that's great. We'll take the work, right? But that is not the primary focus of most of your businesses. And if that is your primary focus, then those are your customers and you are a B2B business. Okay. Now, forecasting. How do we forecast? Well, we've got our lines of business. So we know that for each line of business has these elements. If I do sales and installation, that line of business has product sales, it has product installation, and it has services, okay, repairs and things like that. So we know we have 3 revenue streams within that line of business. And one of our clients who does event production with us also does a little bit of that, but it's not predictable. It's not all the time. It's if they open a new office, there's a boardroom that you regularly install for them, and there's the LED wall that you put in the lobby, and they will always bring it to you. But if you don't know that they have one coming in this next year, it doesn't go on your forecast, right? Pretty darn simple. So lines of business, different types of clients. So for a client, let's take ABC company, insurance company is a big client of yours. You know that on an annual basis, you do these five medium-sized shows, you do one big show, you do 10 small projects. And within each of those events is a certain amount of creative, a certain amount of content development or content creation, not just design, but content creation. You have some pre-production, and then you have the event production costs of talent and equipment and expenses to do that event on site. So the end result is the event, but you have the other elements that happen as standalone products before them. I can break all of those out. Clients are easy. They give us their schedule. We kind of know the size of the projects we're going to do, so we can forecast that pretty accurately. Customers gets a little bit trickier because, one, they're not necessarily loyal, but a certain subset of your customers are quite loyal to you, and you can count on them. And you know when their events are because they're published, okay? And if they're not, then their clients, maybe they are a middleman, maybe they are a producer or an agency between you and their client, and their business is not predictable. Now, if I'm dealing with a successful event producer who hires me whenever she gets a new event, and she's maintaining a fairly steady lifestyle, that she's buying $1 million worth of events from me every year, though not always the same customers of hers, maybe half of them, I can count on probably $800,000 of business from her every year. That's going to go in my forecast. Okay. If I see her pipeline shrink, I've got to shrink the forecast for her business. Okay. If her pipeline grows, I'm just going to wait and see what happens, because there's a limit to how much business that middleman producer, that agency can handle. Now, a bigger agency, they probably have more business than you're handling for them. You're working on market share. So how much of their business is coming to you because you're regional? It's a crapshoot. If you're just doing their regional business, you can ask them, how many jobs are you going to have in my town next year, and maybe make a forecast. Or you can figure out how to be a preferred provider for them. So it's geographically agnostic. Okay? And win more of their business. So doing a forecast also helps you with your selling strategy of how do you need to be talking to these people. Okay. So if I can't forecast your revenue or the revenue you're going to give me, then, and you have a lot of it, then I've got to do a better job of making myself valuable and part of your overall plans. Now, pickup business is seasonal. We know that May is always going to be busy. Everybody's doing graduations. There's all this, corporate work going on. And we know that if we can answer the phone and we can support that customer, that potential buyer, that we can pick up that business. So for any given month, it's not a percentage of the total revenue we do. It is how much demand for pickup business is there in that month. Now, back when I was selling, July was a dead month for corporate work. We had no pickup on our forecast in July because there wasn't any. We barely had, predictable revenue, much less unpredictable revenue. So we didn't bank a lot of that. If we got it, great, we'd do it. Okay, but we couldn't forecast it because we didn't know where it was coming from. Now, you go back to May when we were traditionally very busy. We knew that while we had most of our revenue was in 2 weeks, we had another 2 weeks that had a lot of capacity in it. We had more room for pickup business, and we also know demand is higher, so that we're going to work more aggressively to win the jobs that don't fit our busy 2 weeks. They fit our less busy 2 weeks. So again, now I'm forecasting. I'm getting an idea of what this all is. And my goal is not to forecast a huge number for next year so that we can have our pre-success parade. It's to understand how much resources do I need to dedicate to filling the gaps, working on future business all the time. So I'll go back to the story about my preamble, which, the owner wanted to stop selling for 2 months. Well, he could stop selling for about 3 days. That's all he had in him emotionally. He just couldn't do it. He loved to sell. He loved people to need him and need his team, and would do anything he could to get a job. So it was very difficult for him to turn away business. And but he had to let the guys cool down, get their laundry done, see their families. Try and make it easier on them for a little bit and give them some hope. But they had to put off projects. They needed to reorganize the warehouse. They needed to fix their pricing. They needed to do some marketing. They needed to have team meetings. They had to do personnel reviews. All these things they needed to keep their business successful, they kept putting off. They kept putting off because they were feast or famine on work. And if they had no work, they had no money. So they didn't feel like doing anything that would incur money, that would cost any money at all. So they get into this silly cycle of the ups and downs of revenue. And thank goodness that 8 weeks of busy revenue kept them from selling anything for the 8 weeks after that. There was nothing on their books. Now, what happened was stuff started filling in because they had pickup business. It wasn't in their forecast. It wasn't expected, but everybody who called them was a known buyer, somebody they worked with every single year. A lot of them were agencies. They picked up a job, boom, dumped it in their laps. Unpredictable revenue, except it was predictable. And if this team had wanted to improve the revenue, if this owner wanted to have better revenue, if they had done a proper forecast, they would have known that they can't afford to have the entire team out on a show site or multiple show sites over 8 weeks and abandon all the needs of the rest of the business and those customers who have future business who are going to be neglected. They had the luxury of focusing on one customer at a time, and they paid the price for it. And team burnout, an unpredictable revenue flow, low margins, very low margins, and very bad cash flow because they had so much up and down in their business and such a huge team to deal with the busy months. So forecasting helps anticipate all of that so that we don't make the mistakes of this team was making, and they didn't need to because the information was there. So I invite you, take a look at your lines of business, take a look at your customer types, look at all the different services and products they buy, revenue types they buy from you within those lines of business, and get on your forecast for next year. Because without a forecast, how do you know when and how to allocate your resources to make sure you continue to grow while servicing the customers you have? It's that simple. have fun, make money. Why else are we in business? Thanks for listening.
If you liked this episode of the Intentional Success Podcast, please leave a review and don't forget to like and subscribe. This podcast has been brought to you by the helpful folks at Mertz Crew.